Hi, fantasy readers. This is Corinne Norton, your fellow bookbinger, and you're listening to the Finding Fantasy Reads podcast, where you can test out a new fantasy story every single week to find your next favorite author. You'll want to stick around for today's story if you like elves and bromance. It's written by H.S.J. Williams, who has always been fascinated with the magic of imagination, whether in word, art, or costume. She lives in a real fantastical kingdom, the beautiful Pacific Northwest, with her very own array of animal friends and royalty-loving family. Williams studied and taught fantasy illustration in art school and long dreamt of illustrating her own books, a dream that's now been realized. She may also be a part-time elf. Today's narrator is Paeter Frandsen, host of Christian Geek Central. Stick around to the end or check out today's show notes to see where you can find more from both the author and the narrator. For now, please enjoy King and Knight by H.S.J. Williams.
A trainer would be good for you, Leoren had said. Attacking wooden figures is not going to release your tension. You need a challenge. I'm in need of someone I can't kill, Arrance muttered in the privacy of his own mind. It never went over well when he submitted such thoughts aloud. He had tried to spar with his elven soldiers, but every time the heat in his blood rose dangerously high. One time he had let it go too far enough for fear to flicker in the soldiers' eyes. He'd refused to fight anyone after that. Leoren now insisted he'd found the answer. Until this morning, he'd failed to mention it came in the form of a male human. Not that Arrance really had a hatred of humans. Leoren was the one more reserved around their kind, despite being an ambassador. Still, the majority of monsters whom Arrance had fought in Territorum had been human men, and his opponent could only aggravate those memories. There was an even more unsettling detail. The man was from the Never-Known. Arrance's skin chilled at that bit of information. As a boy, he'd met someone from that distant world only once, a friend of his father who was a human, yet immortal and ancient. The man had been very impressive and kind in a wise, ageless sort of way, but he was yet another who would remember Arrance only as he was, and not understand what he had become. At least this trainer would have nothing with whom to compare. Taking a deep breath, Arrance adjusted his belt and sword one last time and pushed through the double doors to the courtyard where Leoren and the dark-haired stranger spoke. Leoren smiled at him, gesturing to the man. "Your Majesty, I present Sir Desmond Edenry. Sir Edenry, I present you King Arrance." Desmond bowed at the waist with military politeness. "King Arrance." "My thanks for coming all this way, Sir Edenry," Arrance said, equally polite. The man wore a crisp, casual outfit put together with careful detail and precision. Everything about the man bespoke control, from his neatly styled hair to his calm gray eyes. Perhaps, Arrance thought with a twinge of reluctance, perhaps this will go well after all. Perhaps it would be merely a neat and orderly session of training and nothing more. And then the man drew his sword, and his attack was not polite at all. Arrance leapt backwards, drawing his own sword and meeting Desmond's swing with a sharp clang that drowned out Leoren's startled yelp. "You're quick," Desmond said with a smile. "Good. You'll have to be." Without any other formalities, the man turned and walked out to the center of the courtyard. "Let me see your stance, and by the by, I haven't been called Sir Edenry save by a very drunk sailor. You may address me as Desmond or nothing at all." Wonderful. Already they'd managed to start off on the wrong foot. Arrance threw Leoren a look, only to see his uncle flushing in embarrassment. He flushed deeper when he caught Arrance's glance. It was unlike Leoren to not be fully prepared in all things, including social niceties. So blundering a title was a dead giveaway that he was more nervous about this whole setup than he'd let on. Still, it had been a simple mistake of miswording, and Arrance hardly felt it was worth correcting at the initial introduction. This seemed like intentional provocation. especially preceded by that sudden attack. Now fully on guard, Arrance approached the man, this Desmond, and drew his sword. The cold hilt in his hands sent ice running through his veins. For years, he'd never touched a weapon save that which he'd managed to wrest from his enemies. And then it was killing, blood, and battle, until he lost, because in the end, he always lost. He was aware his stance was too defensive, too tense, and that he was gripping the hilt like he gripped a lifeline, but he couldn't touch a sword without thinking of all the times he'd tried to protect himself, and of all the men he'd killed, all the times the sword had been taken from him, and hands had dragged him back down, submitting him to suffer again. He blinked hard. He would be calm. He would be controlled. He was safe, and he would endanger no one. The man was talking again. "And I will call you Arrance," the knight said, twirling his blade and looking into its reflection. "Do you want to know why? Because all men are made of skin, bone, and blood, no matter their race or rank." And when, in the middle of the sentence, he sprang again, sword flashing at Arrance, and he blocked it out of instinct than any real thought. No, all his thoughts had leapt and tangled in confused fright. He braced against the push of Desmond's blade and stared wide-eyed into the steely gaze burning into his soul. "When skin breaks," Desmond said, "all men die the same way." The tangled thoughts tightened into an angry knot. "Imagine that," he snapped through bared teeth. "Someone better give you a medal for stating the obvious. Are we here to fight or exchange philosophy?" Desmond's brows shot up in surprise, the steel in his gaze changing to something less aggressive. He withdrew the pressure of his sword with 3 swift steps backwards, letting the blade relax by his side. He glanced up and down in swift appraisal, as if only now taking in his opponent, student, for the first time. Arrance waited, blade still on guard and glare no less softened. "What made you request me, Arrance?" the man asked, again all professional and polite, but his eyes were still narrowed, still searching over and through him. "I didn't," Arrance replied sharply. "My advisor reached out to you. I tend to take his advice. You're supposed to be able to hone my skills and temper my stress, or something like that." "None of the elves here up for the challenge? Or am I supposed to be expendable?" "Because you're supposed to be the best." "I suppose Kennett told you that. After all, he was the one that told me to accept the offer, meddling immortal that he is. I don't really train people, unless they're my soldiers. I certainly don't train kings." "So I guess the real question is, why did you accept? Broke?" Desmond's mouth twitched, though if it was in humor or annoyance was impossible to tell. Either way, he didn't answer, merely raised his blade again. "I am here for a week to train you," he said. "Whether or not we continue after that depends on how it goes. I believe in the dance of the blade, but I believe it is a deadly dance, and not to be played in halves. I swear I will not harm you, but I will be relentless. Are you prepared for that?" "No, this sounds like a terrible time, and I cannot swear that I won't harm you." Instead, Arrance said, "Yes." It was just a week. There was no way the man wouldn't be frustrated or bored by the time it was over, and then Arrance would simply say he'd tried, and Leorin could tear off another page from his list of therapeutic ideas to add to the fire. Again! Arrance reeled a step back from the hard parry and sucked in his breath. It was only the 3rd day, but so far these training exercises had done nothing to help him work out his frustrations. Instead, it only seemed to add to them. He glared at the man across from him, this trainer from another land, this Sir Desmond Edenry. He was a master of swordplay, Arrance couldn't deny that, and with each encounter the underlying urge to beat him grew stronger. Perhaps a bit of his spite showed in his eyes, because Desmond's face hardened in response, and his sword darted out. "Again!" he commanded. Their steel met in ribbons of silver, creating patterns of light through the air, faster and faster, till his hands became slick with sweat, and his heartbeat began to thunder in his ears. In between the strokes of his blade, he'd catch glimpses of his trainer's face, grim and cold in concentration, but the face kept changing, flicker to other faces he could hardly say he recognized, but still set a blaze of fear inside him. He shouldn't have trained today. He knew he should have cancelled it. The previous night had been especially hard, the dreams so close to the morning that they had maintained a tight grip on his spirit. He should have just told the man they were skipping today. He didn't even need to give him an explanation. He didn't need, "Watch your defense!" The sword smacked across his shoulder with a crack as swift and bright as lightning, and like lightning, it sent electricity streaking through him. All at once, his frustrations and doubts were gone, replaced only with a white-hot rage. He spun, reversing the hilt in his grip, and in the same moment his leg arched out and kicked the blade from Desmond's hand. In the next swift series of movements, he had the man against the wall, sword pressed against his throat. Desmond stared at him. His eyes were not angry. They were not even afraid. They just looked quietly and with a tiny bit of reproof. And then Arentz could hear it, even above the blazing roar in his head. The silence. The dead silence of shock from what he'd just done. Leorin was probably somewhere watching in horror if he hadn't fainted dead away. "Let go of me," Desmond said calmly. Arentz did. He stumbled backwards, the fire fading from his blood, the blood draining from his face. In that moment, he hadn't even been thinking of defeating Desmond. He'd been thinking of murdering him. Which he hadn't. He hadn't, but... Breath rattling out of his chest, he dropped the sword, turned, and hurried from the courtyard. Not daring to look back, not daring to try and explain. It was a mistake. This whole thing had been the worst of mistakes, and it wasn't one he was going to make again. Damaric, head healer of Aselvia, had come to watch the sparring. He'd arrived in the middle of the match, but as it turned out, the only thing that mattered was the end. What mattered was that Arentz had snapped, disarmed his trainer, and pinned him against the wall with the sword. And the man quietly withstood him, bringing Arentz back to himself. The young king fled from the courtyard in utter shame a few moments later. From his vantage on the upper balcony, Damaric could not hear much of what Leorin said to the human man, but the stressful apology was clear. He did hear something about an invitation, which was politely refused with a shake of the head, and Desmond headed out of the courtyard and back for the stables at a brisk walk. Only, it was not quite the right sort of brisk walk. Damaric followed him from the walkway above, watching the occasional lurch in his stride. He'd been injured in some way. Stairs. Damaric had just about taken a tumble down the flight, he was so distracted. He swiftly descended the stairway in time to intercept the captain. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "I am Damaric, head healer of the kingdom. I wanted to be sure you were not injured in the sparring match." The man glanced at him, then again with concealed surprise, probably at the eye patch or strands of white hair. It had been a while since Damaric had met anyone new enough to notice besides young children, but the man ducked his head and said gruffly, "I'm fine, no need to worry." "You had a very rousing bout, if I may say so," Damaric said, folding his hands in his sleeves. "At least allow me to offer a quiet moment to sit and rest. We are honor-bound to give you hospitality." Heaving a sigh, Desmond looked up at the sky and then shrugged. "I cannot stay long, but I suppose a moment wouldn't—" He winced. "Hurt." The nearest healing room was not far, thankfully, and Damaric offered Desmond the comfiest chair before setting a brass kettle in the small, smoldering hearth. "May I inspect your injury?" Desmond huffed and leaned back. "I thought I was just coming in to rest. I already told you I'm fine." Brushing away a slight smile with a sigh, Damaric glanced at him. "Forgive me, but it is my job to notice such things. You were limping slightly, and if it was caused from the sparring, it is my honorable duty to care for— All right, so I got scratched, Desmond said crossly, his hand lingering near his leg. There was something uncomfortable in his manner, some embarrassment he didn't wish to be known. Damarick considered him for a while and then reached up, undid the scarf from his face, and set it aside. There is no reason to hide in a place of healing, he said gently. The man did look a bit surprised, not so much at the state of the scarring and missing eye, but perhaps because of whom they marred. Then he gave a heavy sigh and reached down to the top of his boots. I don't want this getting around to the king. I don't appreciate being treated differently. I understand. Desmond tugged off his boot, revealing a shining metal leg and foot, then rolled up his pant leg above his knee. Just below the knee, the metal limb was bound to the flesh, and a slight cut bled right where they met. No wonder he limped. Biting his tongue against questions of how such a wonderful prosthetic existed and functioned, Damarick opened a jar of cream while Desmond undid the false leg. The healer patted the blood away with a soft, wet cloth, then rubbed the cream over the cut with a practiced touch as light as air. Desmond made a surprised noise. "What's that made of?" he asked. When Damarick gave his answer, the knight wrinkled his nose. "Don't believe we have those ingredients back home," he muttered. "I'll send you back with a jar," Damarick said. "Very well. How much?" "No charge. We cannot repay you enough for helping our king." Desmond snorted and winced at the same time. "Helping? Not sure I would call it that." "Oh?" "Well, I'm supposed to help him release stress." "Huh. He released it all right, though I'm sure it's back tenfold now. Some trainer. I made the mistake. I pushed him too hard. I was told he had a troubled past, and I didn't accommodate. It's not like he has reason to trust me, but I just went ahead and drove him into a dark corner. I doubt he'll want to continue training." Damarick stilled and looked worried. "Please, do not give up on him, Sir Knight. If you abandon him now, he will sink further into the belief that he is an irreparable monster, and that is not a wound I can heal." "I'm not quitting," Desmond snapped. "I don't quit. I just doubt he'd want me back." "He wants assurance," Damarick said. "Perseverance and loyalty. He doesn't have it for himself, so he needs it from others. I can only pray eventually he will accept it." Arentz was only picking at his dinner. It was normal for him to be late or forgetful, but if one was actually able to sit him down to eat, he usually possessed an enormous appetite. But Triss watched him stab his fork into the honey-glazed venison repeatedly, without ever bringing it up to his mouth. After he stirred his creamed potatoes for the fourth time, she cleared her throat. "Is something on your mind?" She already knew what it was. Leorin had told her. Training with the human captain had not gone well today. Arentz continued to stare at his plate, mind miles away. "Arentz, please look at me." Somewhat unwilling, he pried his gaze up from the meal and met her eyes. "What is bothering you?" "Specifically," she added as an afterthought, as he could often answer such a broad question with the vaguest responses. She'd learned to go straight for the point rather than struggle through his evasiveness. "It was the training today, wasn't it?" "Yes, that training." A savage little spark lit his eye. "That was such a brilliant idea. I certainly need more training on how to fight and kill. I was feeling a bit rusty, so isn't it just wonderful to prove I've still got it?" He glanced down at the plate as if noticing the food for the first time and pushed it away. "You didn't hurt him," she said. "You held back." "I wonder about that," he muttered. "I can almost remember nicking his leg, but I'm not sure if it happened or not. Honestly, everything was a red blur, just the sort of feeling I used to have back in Tertorum." The anger drained from his face, leaving him looking worn and sickly. "Honestly, I don't know what Leorin thought this would accomplish." "Well," She twined her fingers together with care. I heard what happened, and he did say something to bring you back to yourself. It takes a strong man not to respond aggressively to that kind of attack. He laughed shortly. Indeed, stronger than I. So that's good. In that case, he could be an excellent trainer for you. That must be what Leorin saw. Aerens scowled at her. Fine, hurrah for me, but he's not keeping this up if he's smart. Well, maybe he's strong and foolhardy. Aerens laughed again, this time with slightly better humor. I suppose that's possible. But I don't want to lash out again. I don't want to be pressed to that desperate instinct again. So it's better that we don't continue. Perhaps you two can try some more friendly activities? Build up trust first. She slid her hand across the table, threading her fingers into his. You know that always works best. His mouth twitched, eyes softening. True. True that. But Desmond wasn't here to make friends, so there wasn't much chance of that happening. The more Aerens replayed the scene through his head, the more he was convinced he'd cut Desmond in the leg. He hadn't realized it at first. His sense had been consumed by the instincts and savagery of the monster named Fear. But afterwards, once the red and gray shades had cleared, he could clearly remember the feel of flesh on the tip of his sword, and he'd just stormed away, leaving Desmond to leave on his own. How deep exactly had the cut been? These thoughts cycled endlessly through his head throughout the night, even though his body lay in rigid stillness in an attempt not to disturb Triss. At last, the long hours of darkness came to a merciful end, and the pallor of dawn through the window gave him permission to rise and dress for the day. He washed and changed as quietly as he could, determined to see his decision through. His soft-soled boots were silent on the floor as he made his way to the guest quarters wing of the palace, but the sound of his heartbeat was loud enough in his ears that he felt certain the whole household could hear. He finally reached the door to Desmond's room, its solid wood frame as imposing as a brick wall. He gulped, running a hand down his opposite arm. "Sir Desmond, I have come to apologize," he whispered. "No, too formal. Sir Desmond, I am completely ashamed of my behavior. I should not have walked away." He twisted the edge of his sleeve, forcing each foot forward towards the door. When he reached it, his hand froze before it could knock. There had to be some better way he could say it. Should he just spill all dignity and declare himself completely hopeless and release the poor man from any perceived duty? He should— The door opened. Aerens took a startled step backwards as Desmond stood in the doorway, one arm braced against the frame, the other arm supported by a crutch. A crutch? So he had hurt him. His eyes darted downward, and his mind stalled. Desmond was missing a leg. What? What? He hadn't— It couldn't have been that bad. And even if there was an infection, it couldn't have spread overnight, and surely it couldn't have gotten so bad as to already remove a leg and have the man up and about and— His inner panic must have shown through, because Desmond gave a dry chuckle. "Oh, please. Not even you were that good." What? "Not good enough to take off my leg." Desmond shook the crutch. "Happened before. Not interested in it happening again." This whole time, he'd been walking and fighting on a false leg? He knew the man was skilled, but this spoke of a whole new level of perseverance. He stared at the missing leg for a little too long. Desmond shifted, his discomfort from more than just standing on one leg. "Please don't. It's clear you've got some broken pieces of your own, so I'd rather if you didn't gawk at mine." Aerens shook himself, eyes snapping forward. "Sorry," he said, and that brought rushing back why he was even here in the first place. "And I came to say I'm sorry for my outburst yesterday. I believe I caused you injury, and it was inexcusable." Desmond sighed, took a hop back from the doorway, and waved him inside. I have a hot pot of chicory steeping. Why don't we sit down for a few cups? Arentz mutely followed him inside to where a merry fire crackled in the hearth. The teapot was steaming from where it sat upon a nearby table, and Arentz carefully took it by its wicker-wrapped handle and poured the dark umber drink into the waiting teacups, while Desmond settled himself into the chair and set aside the crutch. The man hummed thanks when Aaron handed the cup over, and then the king took his seat across the way. Arentz carefully sipped at the drink. It was too hot yet, but he could at least pretend to be occupied by its contents while he snuck another glance at Desmond's missing leg. The pant cuff was rolled up past the knee, and the stump was wrapped in soft bandages that looked like Dameric's supply. So that meant at least that the knight had at least been shown the hospitality and kindness of the elves besides the reckless behavior of their king. "You needn't apologize," Desmond began, tapping his fingers against the rim of the cup. "I know the panic that can take hold of a man's mind. It was my fault for driving you there in the first place. You see, it is I who owes you the apology. When I was called here, I didn't want to train you, and I was even less interested in who you were." Arentz stopped trying to steal glances at the leg. He had plenty of questions about how the man got around so well as to still fight with the skill of a master, but as they'd turned to this subject, he had to find an answer that had never been properly given the first time. "Why did you come, then?" "Because Kenneth asked me to, as I said before, and it's hard even for me to tell that man no. But I admit—" Desmond paused, and then carefully forged ahead. "I might have also thought that this was my chance to knock a king down onto his bum, if I'm completely honest." Arentz considered this. "You have a problem with kings?" Desmond winced. "Afraid that is a bit of a sore spot, yes. But I am trying to learn that perhaps not every king is as troublesome as the ones I've known." When Arentz said nothing else, the knight went on. "The point is, I came in with a preconception of who you were. Kenneth tried to tell me you were troubled, but I was only ready to see an elf king with a poor attitude. And I'm sorry. I've already asked God to forgive me, but whether you do or not is entirely up to you, and if you ask me to leave this minute, I will." Arentz's hand had not moved from where it rested against his chin during this whole confession, but he at least straightened and rubbed the back of his neck. "If I were to imagine the sort of spoilt king you were expecting, I could understand the desire to knock him down onto his bum." A small smile curved his mouth at that, and Desmond answered the smile with a relieved one in return. "Even so, I regret how I've handled this. You have a great deal of strength and skill in how you handle yourself in a fight. There is a great deal of raw energy still to be refined, and acting as a true trainer, I could help you hone it properly. But with the way things stand, I don't think it would be wise for us to just jump back into the ring, even if you wanted to. But if you'd consider it, I would like to become your friend." Arentz blinked. Of all the things he'd expected to hear this morning, an offer of friendship was not one of them. Triss had been right. "Why?" It wasn't perhaps the most gracious response to ever leave his mouth, but it was the only thing he could say at the moment, and he needed to know. "It's not pity, if that's what you're thinking. I can't stand people doing things merely out of pity." He patted the stump of his leg for emphasis. "But there are not many men who have disarmed me, and I have to admit, I'm now more than a little curious about your story and wish I'd listened to Kenneth better at the start of this. You must understand something about my people. We love a good story." "I'm not sure I would call mine good until near the end." "That's how the best ones usually go. Take mine. It wasn't that long ago I thought it was all over for me." Desmond tapped his other leg, and even under the fabric, Arentz heard a faint metallic clink. "Both of them?" "Both of them. Skirted very close to losing the rest of me." "How are you standing again? How are you fighting still?" "See, that's the best kind of story. And it's a story I want you to tell yourself. So, whatever you've been through, I'd like to lend a hand in helping you find your feet again. We can talk, race horses, whatever you want. When we do pick up blades again, we'll take it much slower until you're ready to find peace, not pain, in the art of the sword. How about it, Your Majesty?" Arentz sat silent for a few moments, staring at new, tepid chicory in his cup. When he looked up again, a slight spark was in his eye. "My name is Arentz," he said. The man's smile was as warm as the summer. "A pleasure to meet you, Arentz. I'm Desmond Edenry."
I hope you enjoyed listening to King and Knight by H.S.J. Williams, narrated by Paeter Frandsen of Christian Geek Central. If you want to read more by Williams, go to hsjwilliams.com to find more of her books. Her ongoing series, Kings of Aselvia, has more of Arentz and his Kingdom of Elves, and you can snag more short stories about them when you sign up for her newsletter. I'll have a direct link in the show notes. One thing that's very unique about her world is that it's connected to the world created by her dear writing friend, Bryn Shutt. In this particular story, Desmond is a character she borrowed from Bryn's world, because over the years of creating their stories, they found their characters also becoming friends, and they created a few crossover tales for fun. These small cameos make occasional appearances throughout their books, which is such a fun thing I've never seen done before, and I absolutely love it. So if you want to learn more about Sir Desmond, you'll want to check out Illuminaire and the rest of Bryn Shutt's oncoming releases. I'll have a link for it in the show notes. If you enjoyed listening to Paeter narrate the story, you might also enjoy listening to his audio dramas at spiritblade.com or his podcast, Christian Geek Central, where he discusses movies, video games, and all things enjoyed by self-proclaimed geeks from a Christian worldview. If you're enjoying listening to Finding Fantasy Reads, please consider leaving a review. I think people have gotten used to leaving reviews for books and purchased products on places like Amazon, but podcast reviews are helpful too. It's the first place people look before deciding if they want to dive into a new podcast. If you're not sure how to leave a review, check out today's show notes for some easy instructions. Thank you all for listening. Happy New Year and happy reading.